In St. Louis, Missouri, 2-year-old Brian Wells was the vibrant, joyful center of his young mother Bianca's world. Described by family as the happiest baby in the world, Brian's short life was filled with the simple, profound wonder of early childhood. His aunt shared videos on social media that captured his essence: a little boy with a bright smile and an infectious laugh, playfully clapping his hands to a rhythm only he could feel. These moments, frozen in digital memory, painted a portrait of innocence and potential. For his mother Bianca, Brian was her purpose. Like many young parents, she navigated the complex challenges of single motherhood, working to build a stable life for herself and her son. Her love for him was the driving force behind her long hours and sacrifices. Their world, while perhaps not without its struggles, was defined by that fundamental bond between mother and child. The ordinary rhythm of their days, the meals, the playtime, the bedtime routines, formed the fabric of their shared existence. Brian's laughter echoed in their home, a constant reminder of the beauty she was working so hard to protect and nurture. To the outside observer, and certainly to Bianca herself, Brian was a toddler thriving in the care of a mother who adored him. His future was an unwritten story, a blank page awaiting the chapters of school, friendships, and growing independence. The trust a mother places in the world to keep her child safe is absolute, a fragile faith built on the hope that the inherent goodness in people will shield the most vulnerable among us. In late October, this was the reality for Bianca and Brian Wells, a reality about to be shattered in the most unthinkable way imaginable, a tragedy waiting in the wings of their ordinary lives, poised to rewrite their story in the darkest ink. The practical demands of life soon intersected with this domestic picture. Bianca Wells, committed to providing for her son, faced a common parental dilemma: the need for reliable childcare while she worked. In her search for a trustworthy solution, she turned to a figure who occupied a position of intimacy and trust in her life: her 21-year-old boyfriend, Nico Cotton. This decision, made from a place of necessity and faith, would become the pivotal moment upon which the entire tragedy turned. Cotton was not a stranger. He was someone Bianca had invited into her personal world, a man she presumably believed shared her affection for Brian and could be relied upon to act in the child's best interest. The details of their relationship and the duration of Cotton's involvement in Brian's life are not fully public, but the act of leaving her son in his care signifies a significant level of confidence. On October 27th, this trust was put into action. Bianca went to work, presumably carrying the quiet anxiety of any parting parent, but also the reassurance that her child was with someone she knew. Meanwhile, Nico Cotton assumed the role of sole caregiver. The hours stretched ahead, a span of time that should have been filled with the mundane routines of babysitting, feeding, playing, perhaps watching over nap time. For Brian, this was just another day in the familiar company of an adult his mother knew. There was no forewarning, no visible sign of the cataclysm to come. The house where this care was to occur was not even Brian's own home, adding another layer of displacement to the scenario. This geographical detail would later become a point of clinical interest for investigators, a puzzle piece in reconstructing a timeline of terror. In that unassuming setting, the absolute vulnerability of a 2-year-old child was now paired with the absolute authority of an adult whose intentions, contrary to all expectation and reason,
were about to reveal a profound and shocking malevolence. The first official record of the catastrophe was a 911 call placed at approximately 10:40 p.m. on October 27th. The call originated from a residence in St. Louis's Mark Twain neighborhood, a house that was not Brian Wells's home. The urgent report was of a 2-year-old child who was unresponsive. The dispatch of emergency services set in motion a formal, procedural response to a scene of profound human crisis. First responders, trained to handle medical emergencies, arrived to find a situation that immediately strained the bounds of a typical pediatric distress call. The child, Brian, exhibited no signs of consciousness. The adults present at the scene were identified as Nico Cotton and another individual, neither of whom were the boy's parents. The immediate priority was preservation of life. Brian was rushed from the residence to a nearby hospital, where a team of medical professionals undertook desperate efforts to resuscitate him. Despite these efforts, the injuries he had sustained were too severe. Brian Wells was pronounced deceased at the hospital. His young life ended not by illness or accident, as might first be assumed, but by forces yet to be officially determined. The transition from a medical emergency to a potential crime scene began at that moment. Police officers on site, noting the unusual circumstances, the child's condition, the location, the caregivers involved, initiated the first layer of protocol. The St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department's Child Abuse Unit was notified and took charge of the preliminary investigation. The adults, including Nico Cotton, were separated and questioned as part of this initial fact-finding stage. The nature of Brian's injuries, though likely apparent to medical personnel, required official documentation and analysis. That night, lacking immediate, conclusive forensic evidence of foul play, investigators released Cotton and the other adult pending further investigation. This step, while potentially jarring in retrospect, is a standard part of a careful investigative process, awaiting the objective evidence of an autopsy before making an irreversible legal accusation. The definitive truth about Brian Wells's death emerged not from witness statements, but from the silent, objective science of forensic pathology. On October 29th, 2 days after the 911 call, the medical examiner's office completed its autopsy report. This document transformed the case from a suspicious death into a confirmed homicide, providing the stark clinical facts that would guide every subsequent action. The cause of death was ruled a homicide, resulting from multiple internal and asphyxial injuries. The specific findings were detailed and horrifying. Brian had suffered a lacerated liver, a severe internal trauma indicative of massive, blunt force. Furthermore, the examination revealed clear evidence of strangulation, the telltale signs of external pressure applied to the neck. Most disturbingly, the autopsy also documented signs of sexual assault. This triad of findings, violent internal trauma, asphyxiation, and sexual violation, painted a picture of sustained, brutal abuse inflicted upon a toddler. The medical examiner's report served as an unimpeachable witness, converting the abstract suspicion of the investigators into concrete, actionable evidence. There was no ambiguity in the language of the findings. These were injuries inconsistent with any accidental fall or childhood mishap. The lacerated liver alone spoke to a level of force that was deliberate and extreme. With this report in hand, the legal landscape shifted instantly. The case was formally transferred from the Child Abuse Unit to the Homicide Division, reflecting the confirmed criminal nature of the death. The medical evidence established the what and the how with chilling clarity. It now fell to detectives to establish the who and to build the bridge between this forensic reality and the individuals who had been present during Brian's final hours. This report was the key that unlocked the next most critical phase of the investigation, moving it from a procedural inquiry to a focused pursuit of justice for a child whose body bore the undeniable marks of a profound evil. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from the medical examiner, detectives moved decisively. On October 30th, Nico Cotton returned to the police station, this time turning himself in. It was in this controlled environment, after being formally read his Miranda rights, that Cotton allegedly provided a statement that would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. According to the subsequent probable cause affidavit filed by police, Cotton confessed to the acts that led to Brian Wells's death. He reportedly admitted to sexually assaulting the 2-year-old boy. Furthermore, he stated that during this assault, he strangled Brian. This confession, as outlined in the legal document, provided a narrative that aligned with the medical findings, detailing a sequence of violence that culminated in the child's death. The affidavit notes that the confession included graphic and specific details, which have been sealed from public view due to their disturbing nature. The core allegation, however, is stark: a brutal sexual attack ending in fatal asphyxiation. Following this statement, formal charges were swiftly filed against Nico Cotton. The charges were severe and multiple, reflecting the different facets of the alleged crime: murder in the second degree, forcible sodomy, statutory sodomy, and abuse of a child resulting in death. This multi-count indictment is a common prosecutorial strategy, designed to cover every legal angle of the criminal conduct and ensure that, even if a jury were to acquit on one charge, conviction on another would still guarantee a lengthy prison sentence. The confession, if deemed admissible in court, represents a formidable obstacle for any defense. In the American legal system, a defendant's own words are among the most powerful tools a prosecutor possesses. However, the circumstances of that confession, the reading of rights, the environment of the interrogation, the mental state of the accused, will inevitably be scrutinized by defense attorneys seeking to challenge its validity or the context in which it was given. The specific charges levied against Nico Cotton are not arbitrary. They represent a calculated legal strategy grounded in Missouri state law. Each charge serves a distinct purpose and carries its own burden of proof and potential sentence. Murder in the second degree, under Missouri statute, is defined as knowingly causing the death of another person, or, crucially, causing death while committing or attempting to commit another felony. In this case, the underlying felony would be the alleged sodomy. This charge avoids the need to prove the premeditation required for first-degree murder, while still addressing the ultimate loss of life. The charges of forcible sodomy and statutory sodomy, though related, target different legal elements. Forcible sodomy hinges on the prosecution proving that the act was committed by the use of forcible compulsion. Statutory sodomy, conversely, is defined by the victim's age, in this case, a child under 12. By charging both, the prosecution ensures that even if a defense successfully argues one element, for instance, challenging the specific proof of compulsion, the conviction on the age-based charge remains likely. Finally, the charge of abuse of a child, resulting in death, acts as a powerful backstop. It requires proof that the defendant committed abuse against a child and that the abuse resulted in the child's death. The sentencing structure is particularly severe. Missouri law mandates that sentences for unclassified felonies, like forcible and statutory sodomy, must run consecutively to any other sentence imposed. This means the prison time for those convictions would begin only after any sentence for murder or child abuse is completed, potentially stacking decades upon decades of incarceration. This strategic stacking of charges illustrates the prosecution's aim to secure a conviction that carries a de facto life sentence, leaving no legal avenue for early release, and reflecting the extreme gravity of the crimes alleged. From a defense attorney's perspective, the case against Nico Cotton presents a formidable, though not insurmountable, challenge. The apparent strength of the prosecution's evidence, a detailed confession aligned with definitive medical proof of a violent homicide, dictates a specific strategic approach. The primary line of defense will almost certainly involve a meticulous attack on the confession itself. Attorneys will examine the entirety of the police interrogation. Was the Miranda warning administered clearly and effectively? Was Cotton's waiver of his rights knowing and intelligent? Could factors such as fatigue, intimidation, low cognitive ability, or a desire to end a stressful interrogation have rendered the statement involuntary or unreliable? The defense may explore the possibility of a false confession, a phenomenon where individuals, particularly under duress, admit to crimes they did not commit. While the medical evidence seems to contradict a claim of complete innocence regarding the abuse, the defense does not necessarily need to deny the abuse occurred. Instead, a more plausible strategy may involve challenging the link between Cotton and the fatal injuries. This could involve scrutinizing the timeline of Cotton's sole custody. Did anyone else have access to Brian Wells in the hours or days before his death? Could the injuries have been inflicted earlier and only manifested lethally while in Cotton's care? The defense's goal would be to inject a sliver of reasonable doubt regarding who, specifically, caused the injuries that killed Brian. They might also seek to highlight Cotton's action in seeking help, the 911 call, as evidence inconsistent with the mental state of a deliberate murderer. Every procedural step taken by police will be reviewed for errors, and every scientific finding, while difficult to contest outright, may be questioned regarding the precise timing or mechanism of injury. The defense's role is not to prove innocence, but to force the prosecution to prove its case beyond every reasonable doubt, a high standard, even when the evidence appears overwhelming. The human tragedy at the heart of this case extends far beyond the courtroom. For Brian Wells's family, particularly his mother, Bianca, the aftermath has been a landscape of unimaginable grief and public anguish. In interviews with local media, Bianca Wells gave voice to her devastation. "I watch Law & Order all day," she told KMOV, "so to feel like this is me and this is my baby. He doesn't deserve this. Feels like my heart is shattered. It doesn't feel like I have air in my lungs right now." Her statements reflect the surreal horror of seeing one's personal nightmare reflected in the kind of fictionalized crime drama consumed for entertainment. She also shared a poignant message born of her loss, urging others to support your family, be there for them, because you could be like me and have nothing. This speaks to the isolation and lack of a support system that may have underpinned her fateful decision to leave Brian with Cotton. The boy's godmother, LaToya Johnston, provided further context to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She emphasized that Bianca was not a bad mom, but rather a trying mom who was doing her best under difficult circumstances. "There's no book on parenting," Johnston said. "There's no foundation of knowing how to take care of a child. She was trying, and she had the love and support of people trying to help her learn." These public comments serve a dual purpose. They are both an outpouring of raw grief and a defensive shield against the inevitable public scrutiny and judgment that falls upon a mother in such cases. The family's decision to share the joyful videos of Brian is itself an act of reclamation, an effort to ensure the world remembers him not as a victim defined by a horrific end, but as a bright, laughing little boy whose life, however brief, was filled with light and love. Their mourning is now inextricably linked to the slow grind of the justice system, forcing them to measure their healing against court dates and legal maneuvers. Cases of such extreme violence against children inevitably force a painful societal introspection that extends beyond the specific facts of the crime. The death of Brian Wells raises difficult systemic questions about child safety, parental support, and the limits of trust. It highlights the precarious position of single parents, particularly those without robust family networks or financial resources, who are forced to make childcare decisions based on availability and trust, rather than on rigorous vetting that may be unavailable to them. The case touches on the silent epidemic of child abuse, much of which occurs within domestic settings at the hands of known caregivers. It also prompts difficult conversations about the assessment of risk within personal relationships. How can a parent discern a hidden capacity for violence in a partner? Are there societal mechanisms that could better support vulnerable families to prevent such desperate choices? Furthermore, the initial police response, questioning and releasing Cotton before the autopsy results were known, though standard procedure, invites public debate about the balance between thorough investigation and the urgent need to secure a potentially dangerous individual. Could earlier detention have been justified? These questions do not have easy answers. The legal process is designed to be methodical and evidence-based, sometimes at odds with the public's desire for immediate action and protection. This tragedy serves as a grim reminder of the absolute vulnerability of young children and the monumental responsibility borne by those who care for them. It underscores the reality that evil can reside in the most familiar of places, shattering the fundamental assumption of safety that underpins the parent-child bond. The community is left to grapple with a profound breach of trust and the chilling realization that the unthinkable is not only possible, but happens in neighborhoods, in homes, and between people who are supposed to love and protect one another. As of now, Nico Cotton remains in custody at the St. Louis City Justice Center, held without bond, as he awaits the next stages of the legal process. The path forward will follow the established contours of the American criminal justice system. His defense attorney will file motions, likely including challenges to the admissibility of the confession or requests to suppress other evidence. The prosecution will respond, and a judge will rule on these pre-trial matters. A critical juncture will be the decision of whether to offer a plea agreement or proceed to a full trial. Given the severity of the charges and the alleged confession, prosecutors may see little incentive to offer a reduced plea, aiming instead for the maximum possible sentences at trial. Conversely, the defense might seek a plea to avoid the public spectacle of a trial and the potential for even harsher penalties from a jury. If the case goes to trial, it will be a profoundly difficult proceeding for all involved. The medical evidence will be presented in clinical detail. The confession, if allowed, will be read into the record. Brian's family will likely be called to testify, forcing them to relive their trauma in a public forum. The jury will be tasked with the heavy burden of weighing horrific evidence and determining guilt or innocence on multiple serious charges. For Bianca Wells and Brian's family, this legal process represents a protracted and painful journey toward a form of closure they may never fully achieve. Their search for justice is now channeled through the impersonal mechanisms of the state. The final verdict, whatever it may be, will not return the laughing little boy from the videos. It will not fill the silence in his home, but it will represent society's formal judgment on the alleged destruction of an innocent life, a slow and steady attempt to answer violence with law and to counter profound evil with the measured, if imperfect, pursuit of justice. The memory of Brian Wells, preserved in those few seconds of video, now exists in stark contrast to the legal documents and court transcripts that will forever define the end of his story.